play pool with guys, I maintain I should get a handicap if they don't have any hair, because whenever they bend down to shoot, that light, oh, blinds you. It's terrible.
An interesting proposition there, you know, that,
And some of them will actually give me a ball or two on that.
oh, you're kidding.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's when they think they're really good.
It's like my husband, you know, traveling around here, every time we go through a McDonald's or someplace like that, he says, and now I'll take my 15% traveler's discount. And you know, you get some dumb kids.
Oh, sure.
Well,
Oh, sure. That's a good idea. I'll try that.
okay, very good. So I just recently met someone who bought a condominium from you in 1974 at Loggerhead Key. That was the Burks, Elaine Burke.
Oh, sure.
You
She
remember
had Schneiderman's Furniture in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Is that right?
And they bought one 81 or 171, maybe 171. Ha, I remember them.
Well, she
Ray
certainly
and Elaine. He must
remember
be gone.
you rehearsing lines with someone for some production at the Pirate
Oh,
Playhouse.
sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in a play. What's it called?
The Reluctant Debutante. Must have been.
Well, no, it was. I remember one of my lines was in God's Green Earth, and I was a politician.
Was it Tobacco Road?
I was a politician, and Pat Slater had the lead, or
Okay.
she and I had the lead, and old Ruth and Philip were hunters. They were doing their thing there.
Well,
Mhm.
save it for the tape now.
It's running.
Oh, okay, well mine isn't.
We'll come
Okay.
back to the Pirate Playhouse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, why don't you start by getting yourself here, your family?
Well, in 1972, I was minding my own business one day. I happened to be the executive director of the Wisconsin Builders Association and the Milwaukee Builders Association in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And in that job, I had responsibility of 92 municipalities and the building codes and the zoning ordinances. And we were a promotional arm, we were a lobbying arm. I'd have been there forever, except two of my past presidents came in and said that they had just bought 10 acres on Sanibel Island in Florida. And I said, well, where's that? Well, West Coast. I didn't know the West Coast from the East Coast, never been to Florida, and really could care less. But I went home and told my wife that these guys had bought this land and they wanted me to go down and look at it, with the idea that I would get involved in the creation of a condominium on Sanibel. And I said, I don't want to go. I'm not interested in that. Why would I do that? I'm perfectly happy doing what I'm doing. But she wanted to go. She was an artist. She had a art degree and felt that Sanibel and Florida would be conducive to furthering her art aspirations. And as it turned out, she ended up being creating and being a partner in Three Crafty Ladies, which has an interesting history that I'll get to. But at any rate, we went to Sanibel. They flew us down here and they put us up at the Shell Harbor Inn. That was at the end of Lindgren. And we walked the beach and she extolled the virtues of Sanibel. I thought it was a sort of a desolate place. It looked just like northern Minnesota. It didn't have anything on it. It had 4 condominiums and a lot of old motels, which are still old motels, and a couple of restaurants. And one of them we went to that night called the Golden Sands.
Boy.
And I remember being in the back room of the Golden Sands on our first night on Sanibel, and Pappy Welker and the Welker twins were playing, and the Welker twins are still playing over at the Mom's Cracker Box, just coming onto Sanibel. But Pappy Welker was ripping off with his I think he played a bass fiddle, or bass fiddle, and everybody was whooping and hollering, and we danced. And I remember I sat down, and a guy next to me pulled a 38 out and put it on the bar, and I said, man, this is just like northern Minnesota. I'm home. I can do this thing. This is not a problem. But we went back to the Shell Harbor and then ultimately went back to Milwaukee, and Arlie worked on me to do this thing, to go down and run this project. And I ultimately did. I resigned my job, came to Sanibel. In August of '72, we moved down with my son Kip, who was then 11, Robin was 10, and David was 3. And we rented a home on Shell Basket Lane, which is now near it's Coquina Beach. Sanibel Beach Club 1 is right in front of it. And we rented a home from Dr. and Mrs. Craig, who eventually were the caretakers or took over the land and caretake the land that is now the sanctuary. They were there for years, if they're not still there.
No, they're not there
But
anymore.
at any rate, we rented this home and we started the project, and I went to the land. It was 10 acres of land. It was just to the right of Lindgren, which would be an extension of Beach Drive or Beach Road. And that 10 acres was a trailer park, and the trailer park was owned by Velna Ridge. We bought the land from Velna. It was 600 foot of beach frontage. We paid $660,000 for it, which was unheard of. That equated to about $4,000 a unit, because we could put 168 units on it. And I remember we paid $1,000 a front foot for the land, and the sale before us was $500 a front foot, and all the people thought we were nuts. How could you pay double the land price to buy land to create a condominium? But anyway, we bought it. We conceived the project. We used Frizzell Architects. We built, or we designed the project as having 4 stories. Well, my first introduction to what I thought I had left in Milwaukee, I thought I left the wars of zoning, the wars of planning, the wars of meetings where people threw things at each other. I came to a peaceful little island in Florida, and it was going to be just like northern Minnesota, and maybe a couple of pistols and rifles, but not a lot of conversation. Well, I found out that was not true. The first onslaught was, how could you build 4 stories with a 35-foot height limitation? Impossible. So the Sanibel people, wasn't city then, but there was a goodly entrenched group that was, in my opinion, didn't want anything built on this island. They had built theirs and they didn't want anything else built. And so I spent many trips down to the Lee County Commission to listen to them tell the Lee County that I couldn't build 4 stories in 35 feet. Well, they were wrong. We could, 8 times 4 is 32, and there's a little bit in between, and you can get 4 stories in 35 feet. Well, I remember one big meeting at Lee County Commission when they insisted that I was going to build the 5th story because I had some parapets to make the building look not like a box. I wanted to make it look like a Mediterranean building, and we had these parapets. They insisted that the parapets can come off because those were walls that I was going to build a 5th story. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I wanted to go, and this was my Builders Association background, I wanted to go to war. My theory was, if they get you on this one, they'll get you every day for the rest of our lives. My partner says, what's the difference? Take the parapets off. And I got outvoted 2-1, and the parapets came off, and the Sanibelites won their first one. Didn't win anything, but on the other hand, we lost something by giving up. The next time I remember we got smacked was Island Water Association. We had priced our units. I brought on Loggerhead K at $38.9 to $55.9 were the prices of the units. Sanibel Moorings was being sold then. Bob Taylor, Mariner Properties, was the floor salesman. He was on the floor selling moorings units, and his prices were 25 to 35. I remember Bob telling me, you can't, there's no way you can sell loggerhead K at 38.9 to 55.9, that's too high. I said, well, that's what it costs to build them, so I don't know how we can sell them for less. But we had priced them, we had them on the market, we were selling, and along came Island Water Association and said that they were raising the water connection fee from $250 to $500, backdated to before we had applied and received our permit. Again, I wanted to go to war. I mean, you can't do that. If you got an agreement, you got an agreement. How can you say something's $250 and then it's $500 and then go back a year and make it start then? But the attitude was, of the developer at that time, is not a problem, just put it in the price. So they're gonna nick us for another $250, put it in the price. My attitude was, you give them another inch and they'll keep doing that. Well, again, I remember calling all the developers, Taylor and the guy that did Sandalfoot, Hollapeter, Cantinas, Frizzell, they all said, quit tilting at windmills. It's not a problem. We'll just raise the price. And so we raised the price and gave them the water deal. That was the beginning. And later on, my land cost per unit was $4,000 a unit, and I think the last land cost per unit was $275,000 a unit, which is, at least I can't afford to live here unless I'm working for Joan and Bert. But in spite of it, we built our project. We got our permits from Lee County. Probably once or twice a month I had to go to the commission and defend myself because we had, in the eyes of the group that was watching us like a hawk, we were doing something wrong. And we won them all, built the project, eventually sold it out, and today it's a completed project with some nice people that came. Interesting, the unit that I sold for $38.9 is now about $375, and the $55.9 unit is about $600,000. And I remember Stan Johnson of Priscilla Murphy Realty saying that he never thought that condos would go above $100,000 on the island. I said, ooh, got to. Can't build any more of those. That same year, when I got here, I remember the lots in Shell Harbor were put on at $7,500 a lot. By the time I got here, they were at $15,000. That was a year later, and they've got to be $350,000 today. So all of the restrictions ended up increasing price, if not increasing value. But I was here, I was a developer, I went through my kids being labeled as developer kids. They had some tough years because the so-called island kids, which weren't really island kids, they were kids of people who had gotten here about 6 months before we got here. They were the island kids. The island kids were their friends, the Heinz boy and you know, the working guys' kids. I was a working guy, they were a working guy. But it took a number of years for the kids to overcome the idea that they were developers' kids. But I got active in the community and bought stock in the new bank, and we conceived a new project called Casharina, which was on the land which is now Sanibel Beach Club 1. And we sold 44 units in it, and that's when interest rates went up to 21%, and the Bank of California withdrew its financing, and we lost the project, and we ended up selling it to Keith Trowbridge, who conceived the first interval project on the island. And I remember going to the first public hearing, and we were permitted to build 84 units on that land by Lee County. And by that time, City of Sanibel had come in, and there was a moratorium on building, and then there was a rollback in density. And the piece of land that we were permitted to build 84 units on, which it was 88 units, which we ultimately couldn't build because we couldn't get financed, it was rolled back to 32 units. And I would have sued them again, but by that time we didn't have the interest because we couldn't build the project anyway. Trowbridge came along and he made it work at 32 units by selling it by the week, which at that time Sanibel thought that was wonderful because they avoided a whole bunch of lawsuits. The project that I claimed was not viable at 32 units, Trowbridge made viable at 32 units by selling it a week at a time. And Sanibel didn't figure out till about a year later that that was really nice, but that created a lot more traffic, a lot more turnover, a lot more washing of clothes, a lot more people going to restaurants, which is very nice, but if their goal was to stop traffic, it went the opposite direction. But the project, that project was very successful, and Trowbridge has gone on to be a very successful guy. Had a few failures, but successful, and now is the Chamber of Commerce executive director. He ate his first meal on Sanibel at our house at Shell Harbor Lane. Came on, maybe got here about a month or two after I did, and I met him and we invited him for a spaghetti dinner, I remember it. I listened to all of his dreams and he listened to mine, and we mostly made them all come true. After Loggerhead, my two partners decided that they'd had enough of the friendship and congeniality of Sanibel, and they said, we're going back to Milwaukee where at least you know who's shooting at you and can do something about it. But I decided to stay, and to stay I had to do something. I wasn't going to develop anymore. We did later, but I had it with going to City Hall and fighting what I consider to be uphill battles. So I created a company called Executive Services, which was to meet the need of what we were selling. We were selling condominiums primarily to people who wanted to use them part of the time and rent them part of the time and hold for 5 to 10 years until they were ready for retirement, at which time they would sell the condominium, hopefully at a profit, and then roll that into a single-family home. Well, when I sold that, I would tell them, well, no problem renting it. You just go up to any real estate broker and tell them what you got, and they've got people and they'll rent it, and no problem, you'll get all the money you want, and it'll almost carry itself. And you know how salesmen are. They tell lots of things that they perceive to be absolutely true. And I really believe that. Well, my customers came back to me and said, well, there aren't those people that will rent this unit, because they all tell us we have to rent it by the month, and you can't get it cleaned, and you can't get it repaired, and how are you going to check people in, and how are you going to hand out the keys, and these things are going to be 25 or 30 miles apart. Impossible. Can't do that. So that seemed to me to be, if somebody says you can't do something, and you're the only one that'll try, that's a good business opportunity. So I created a company that I initially wanted to call it Condo Care Inc., because it was going to be a condominium management company to manage those associations. And then I was going to manage the rentals of those people that wanted to rent. And then I thought, well, if I sold out a couple of projects, why wouldn't I be a project sales company? And then eventually I'll get into general real estate like Priscilla Murphy was in at that time. And so I started a company that I was going to call Condo Care, but there was already a company called Condo Care, and there was already a company called Condo Management, and you had to put a third name down. So I had a buddy in Wisconsin had a company by the name of Executive Services, and he says it's a great name, Bob, because nobody knows what you're doing. I mean, what could you possibly be doing with Executive Services? So I put that down on my my application to the state, and by gosh, it came back, and I became Executive Services of Florida. And that became ESI, and that became ESI Realty, and it ultimately became the biggest vacation rental company in Southwest Florida. We had a check-in desk on Sanibel, we had a check-in desk at Boca Grande. We ultimately managed 500 units, and I always thought of it as a 500-unit hotel with 2 front desks, and I ran it like a first-class hotel. If somebody wanted something, I had people that would go deliver it. I didn't care whether that unit was 25 miles out in the Gulf, or whether it was at Fort Myers Beach or whatever. I ran it like a first-class hotel, and ultimately sold that business to Priscilla Murphy Realty in 1989 after my wife died, and I got off of Sanibel, went north to back to Minnesota. While I was running executive service, and it got to be a pretty good, we had about 100 people on our staff, and I didn't make a lot of, I made a lot of money move. I remember I got a lot of money in, and I paid a lot of money out, and I had a lot of employees. I don't think I ever made a lot of money. It seemed like I was, but I got a good salary, and I was able to build a house and all. But it was the fun of doing something that everybody said you couldn't do, and we were able to do it. Well, but after you get something going, you get a little bored, and so I remember Banks Pravat, his wife is Trudy Pravat, now owns Three Crafty Ladies. Trudy was a partner with Arlie, my wife, Arlie. Banks had a home building company by the name of Sundance Homes, and I had executive services. One night we met at what was today the Jacaranda, then it was Scotty's. And I remember we had, he used to drink gimlets and I used to drink Manhattans. And we had our share. Probably we were beyond our share. And we decided it'd be a good idea if we created another real estate company. And for the life of me, I don't know why we would do that. He had a real estate company, I had a real estate company, but we thought it'd be a good idea to have another. Well, then in walked Bob Potts, who owned Hucksters. And we told, now understand, we're into the gimlets and we're into the Manhattans, and we told Bob our idea. And he said, you guys don't have to buy, or you don't have to create a real estate company. I got one. It's called Sanibel Realty. And I'm not doing anything with it, I'll sell it to you. $10,000 and it's yours. And we said, well, what are we buying for $10,000? Well, you've got a very good salesman, and you've got a wonderful office manager, and you've got this great photocopy machine. And that seemed like a pretty good deal. You got 2 great people and this super photocopy machine. So we bought it. We paid him $10,000. And I remember we walked in on a Monday morning to meet our office manager, who was Juanita Hermes. And later Juanita went to Priscilla Murphy Realty, and later bought Priscilla Murphy Realty, and later sold Priscilla Murphy Realty for lots of bucks. And we said, hi, we're the new owners, and she said, I quit. So our prime person was gone, and then Wilbur Shannon was our top salesman, and he quit. He decided he didn't like us either. And our photocopy machine, if you turn that on Friday, it would warm up so that you could make a copy by Tuesday, maybe. So Potts had done it to us, and we had this, we had this storefront. Oh, and we were paying him rent because he owned Hucksters, and this was in Hucksters, so it was not a good deal, not a good deal at all. So Banks and I looked at each other and said, well, what do we do with it? I don't have time to run it. Banks didn't have time to run it. So we hired a guy to run it, a guy by the name of Bert Jenks. Bert was an Air Force colonel and just retired, and walked in, and we made a deal that he could run it, and we set some goals, and we said, if you meet these goals, we'll sell you, I think it was a quarter of the company. And he met them. We sold him the quarter of the company. I remember we ultimately sold Joan Good a quarter of the company because she was going to be the rental person. And then we eventually sold the company to him because we didn't want the company anyway, so we sold it to them. And as I think back, we created our top competitor. Sanibel Realty used to just kick our tails. And I never understood why we did that, but we did. Maybe made $1 or $2. But then Bert and Joni went on to do a lot of shopping centers and now ultimately came down and bought the Snook and renamed it the Waterside Inn. And that all started with those Manhattans and those gimlets in the back room of Scotty's. I remember when Arlie wanted to have a shop, and because she was the artist, and she looked around, and that was her dream. Could she have a shop on Sanibel Island? And so she went over and made a deal with Trudy Pravat, who had a shop by the name of Island Arts. And it was a consignment shop, and it was located in the building that is now the Sanibel Steakhouse. And Arlie rented space within Island Arts, and she created a little business called the Knot Shop. It was macrame was in there. So here was Island Arts and the Knot Shop. And they would price things, and they would use different stickers, and they could sell each other stuff. And then at the end of the day, they'd spend 2 or 3 hours trying to figure out who sold what and who was supposed to get the money. Well, then they outgrew that space and they moved to what is now a Campbell shop, I think. It's right there by the, I don't know what the building.
Park, the public park.
They're right by the public park. They moved to that building, and the building was too big for them, so they rented a space to a shop which was called the Leather Bee. And it was run by Judy Thompson. Judy Thompson was a daughter of Bob Holopeter. Holopeter had developed Sandalfoot and a number of the condominiums. So here was Judy Thompson and Trudy Pravat and Arlie Buntrock, and they're running these 3 shops. And it's still, they're all separate, and they all knew each other's inventory. And then one day, I was at a council meeting trying to protect whatever interests I had on the island, and the council in its wisdom passed an ordinance that said if there's a building that has 3 or more shops in it, it is by definition a shopping center. Well, I listened to that and I thought to myself, those girls have got 3 shops and it's in a building, and the city of Sanibel just decreed that it's a shopping center. And that was important because they would give the shopping center another sign. You could have a shopping center sign. And that was right when they were coming into getting rid of all the signs and making the signs go down, and items of information. You couldn't tell anybody what you were doing in your business if you just had to have a pretty sign, and then they were too tall, and then they had to get too short. Oh, wow. But I came home and I told the girls, you guys are a shopping center. And they said, no, we're not. We're just in a building. The city of Sanibel says you're a shopping center and you can have another sign. Because on their building they had Knot Shop, Island Arts, Leather Bee, and it was set back off the road and you couldn't hardly see it. So the 3 ladies went out and they drank. They were into Chardonnay, I remember, and they drank a lot of Chardonnay and came up with the idea that they would call their shopping centers 3 Crafty Ladies. And they made a sign. In fact, Banks made the sign out of old plywood, I remember. And he and I put it up, and their business tripled overnight. Everybody wanted to come and stand by a Crafty Lady and take a picture in front of the sign. And they had Love a Crafty Lady t-shirts, and then they did Crafty Lady classes, and then eventually the Leather Bee left, and Arlie and Trudy incorporated into 3 Crafty Ladies, Inc. That was the name of their business. And then began to add the pottery and classes and fabric painting and all. But that business was made successful a lot by them. They were really good. But the city of Sanibel was trying to do something with that sign ordinance, and they just spawned a business. I think they've taken care of that later. I think that's probably gone away. But that's how 3 Crafty Ladies came down the path. In the years after that, I went into business, I remember with Keith Trowbridge in a travel agent, with, I think our name of it was All the Around the World Travel, and we ran that for a year or two, and neither one of us liked that. We didn't like somebody telling us we could only charge 2% or 3%, and those big airlines and everyone. Keith and I were not guys to be having people pass a lot of rules on us, so we got rid of that one real quickly. If you go back to the people, I remember the first day I opened my model at Loggerhead K, I had Vernon McKenzie walk in the door. Vernon and I got to be fairly good conversants. I don't know about friends, but conversants. And he looked at my scale model and he pointed at it and he said, "That will never be built on Sanibel Island." And I said, "Sir, I don't know who you are, but let me tell you something. You're wrong. It's going to be built, and it's going to be built exactly like that." And it was, except for those parapets. They made me take those parapets off. And they did, and not only that, but after the city, and I'll touch on the city, but after the city came, when we conceived the project in '72, the drainage plan of Lee County was like God's drainage plan. If the rain came down, the water drained off. So if you had an island that was 4 foot high or 6 foot high, and the rains came down, the water ran off into the Gulf. Been doing that for years. And when we conceived Loggerhead, the rule was if the water came down and it hit our inner court or our roof or whatever, we should tilt the land so that the water drained to the Gulf. Sort of logical. So we did. Well, when it drained to the Gulf, I remember standing on both sides of Loggerhead, and gullies formed, i.e. erosion, i.e. the water was draining too fast. So I remember we had to put in a bunch of dams and stuff to slow the water down. Then came City of Sanibel, and about 6 months after City of Sanibel, they passed an ordinance. You want me to wait? They passed an ordinance because by that time Island Water Association was into the aquifer scare. You know, if we didn't stop using the water out of the aquifer, I think it was the Hawthorne aquifer, none of us were going to drink again. That's when the rocks got. Remember when we had to put rocks in the yards instead of grass? Oh my goodness! But at any rate, the new deal was you don't drain to the Gulf like God was doing. You tip that son of a gun and you drain to the center of the island where the water can go down and recharge the aquifer, and we all have water forever. Well, when you got a project that's half done and you've trucked in $50,000 worth of dirt to raise one end to make it drain that way, and now you've got to truck in $50,000 worth of dirt to make it drain back this way, that's why the prices kept going up. But we did that. That was the rules, and so we changed the drainage of Loggerhead K. But where was the water going to go? The buildings were already up. We didn't have any pond because we were never required to have a pond. So the city in its wisdom said, dig a hole and make what's called, you know, like in Minnesota we would call it a dry well. You dig a deep hole and you put rocks in it, and then pretty soon water runs in it, and eventually they'll seep down. They said, that's the solution, you dig this hole. And so the center of Loggerhead K was dug out. And I remember, I've got pictures of it, I'd have to find them in the archives, but it would look like a football field that was excavated to 8 to 10 foot deep and whatever a football field is wide. But they forgot that we're only 4 foot above sea level, or 5 or 6. There's no way it filled up with water right away. So then in came the trucks, and we poured many, many, many yards of rock in there under the theory, the old drywall theory, that the water is going to go down and seep in there. Then they made us connect the downspouts of the buildings and the air conditioner drains to the drywall. because now, wow, all this water was gonna come down, go on the roof, go down the downspout, and it was actually gonna run on the ground. Don't wanna do that. Get that into that hole in the ground. So everything was cool. We did everything the city wanted us to do until the first rainstorm. When the hole filled with water, backed up into the downspouts, water was flowing out of the fourth floor, and we're shooting 6 foot high in the first floor units, and they all flooded. So I stood there and just shook my head, and they permitted us to disconnect the downspouts, disconnect the, but those were some of the fun things that happened when the city got woozy. Let me talk on the city a little bit. I happen to have come from a community, New Berlin, Wisconsin. I lived there for 10 years. I went through an incorporation battle in New Berlin. I had been opposed to incorporation then because of expense. This was in Wisconsin. Now, it had nothing to do with Sanibel. So I got here and I listened to the perception that we would be all better off if we would get away from those dirty, rotten guys in Lee County and become our own governor. And I didn't fight it very hard. All I did was get up and say, in my experience, when you incorporate, your taxes will be astronomical. You will have 5 million policemen, and you're going to have everybody. You're going to have jobs that are going to be $200,000 jobs, and everybody's going to have an assistant. And pretty soon, from a money standpoint, you will be spending a lot of money to not accomplish what you say you can accomplish. But that was like tilting against windmills, because it was going to happen, and it did, and now it's, I don't know, what is it, 25 years later? Yeah. And I look around and we got the biggest police, and it's a beautiful island, and I love the island, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But fortunately, I don't own any property anymore, because I perceive that the taxes are relatively astronomical. We've got a pretty big police force. We've got a lot of city employees. And I look at, because when I came to Sanibel, we put the 6th condominium on the island, and the purpose of the city back then was to stop growth. I mean, that's how it got sold, and it didn't stop growth, slowed it down, maybe altered it a bit. Maybe it's not as high as it would have been, maybe the signs are a little lower, but by and large, Sanibel built out, and it built out. It didn't build out like it would have under Lee County, because that rollback in density was in not only the rollback, but the willingness to spend taxpayer funds to defend those actions, the taking of land in effect. Whether that's good or bad, I think Sanibel probably would have looked pretty much the way it does now had we never had a city. Because, you know, I'm not a great Fort Myers booster, but this is still the golden egg out here, and nobody was going to try to destroy that, because they did want the property taxes. They are selling the islands as destinations. But I was opposed to incorporation, and incorporation passed, and it was okay. It got the city, the meetings were just closer. I didn't have to drive as far to go to a meeting. I could just go down to the city hall and do my thing. I was a partner in the land that we bought, which is to the right of the Causeway Road, where the Chamber of Commerce is now and Priscilla Murphy is now. There was a group of about 25 of us that bought that land for, I think we paid $1 million for it back in 72, 3, 4. And we didn't know what we were going to do with it, but we perceived that since it was at the entrance to Sanibel, it is likely to become relatively valuable. So we bought it as an investment, and the city came along and made an offer of, I think it was 1.5 million a couple of years later. And there again, I said, don't sell it. And the city said that they would, I think their threat was that they would stop all development. We would not be able to ever develop it, which I didn't believe. You can't stop it. You can slow it down, but you can't stop it. mean, property rights still means something. But at any rate, the investment group was a group of older gentlemen, and I was a young renegade at that time, about 45 maybe, and I was probably the second youngest of the guys, and we got outvoted, and we sold it for $1.5 million. And if you look today, that's probably, the city owns it, somebody owns it, not me, but I think the city owns it,
Yeah.
and it's not developed, other than parking lots and signs. I used to love that. They never liked any business signs, and today there's got to be 57 signs from the causeway to the corner. Whoa! In fact, I saw Francis Bailey the other day, and I said, Francis, because I sued the city twice. I sued them on the sign ordinance and won. Didn't win for very long because they cleaned up the language, and I forget what my issue was, but I stopped them on the sign ordinance, and then they changed it, and the sign ordinance is what we see today. But that's when the height, and Betty, I think you had a sign, because I remember when I drove on the island, there was it was an Amoco standard station, and it had a normal sign. I mean, it was like all the other standard stations in the world. Now it's about, yeah, now it's about 3 foot off the ground. Yeah, well, I saw.
Watch your view when you look down the road.
I saw Francis Bailey the other day, who was on the council then and was the mayor for years. And I said, Francis, I understand that there's a new sign ordinance coming. He said, I didn't hear that. I said, I understand that all the signs now are going to be on a hydraulic lift, and they're going to be down under the ground, and they'll only come up when people look at them. Then they'll come up, and then when they're not looking, he said, are you still on that sign thing? So we were always able to laugh about it. We kept getting beat, but it was always a chuckle, you know. But you know, there's a certain sameness to the signs. Now they're all the same height. Not so good. Other businesses. Yeah, didn't do too much of the other businesses particularly. I was pretty darn busy. Oh no. We left Sanibel after a while. I had a group of guys, and we decided we didn't want to fight City Hall down here, so we went up to Boca Grande. And that was like going from the frying pan into the fire. I mean, that, you talk about entrenched. Those people are really entrenched. But we conceived a project called Boca Grande North, and it was on a little island called Coal Island, just on the entrance to Gasparilla. And eventually built it. It was 84 units, and finished it about 10 years ago. And I went up to it about 2 weeks ago, and it's beautiful, and the units we sold for 80,000 are now selling for 300,000. And but the island hasn't changed. I mean, there weren't anybody else dumb enough to go up there other than us. Ray Fenton did. He went up and conceived the project too. But that was the only other development group that we did. Over the years, I was very, very close to Walter Klee when Walter was tapped to become the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce, and he was a sharp guy, and he could sure knit together diverse opinions and get it done in great shape. Some of the humorous things that happened, I remember a fellow by the name of Saul Goodman, who was a criminal attorney from New York, walked into my model one day at Loggerhead, and he wanted to buy a condominium, but he said, I'll never buy here because of the dust on Beach Road. And I said, oh, that's too bad, Saul, because we knew there'd be several of you, maybe 10%, maybe it's as low as 5%. And we perceived that you'd be from New York and maybe New Jersey, who would not like what we did to Beach Road. Well, they said, what'd you do? Well, I said, you know, when we got here, Beach Road was asphalt. And we didn't like that because we're from Minnesota and Wisconsin, and we're conservationists and environmentalists. Besides, the aquifer is very important, and we wanted, when the rain came down, we wanted it to seep into the aquifer. So we took that asphalt up. knowing full well that some of you would not like the dust. He said, you did that? I said, we did. He said, I like that. And he says, I'm going to buy one of your condominiums. So he did. He bought Loggerhead K 121. And about 6 months later, he came in and he said, you lie. You're a liar. And I said, what do you mean? He said, there was never any asphalt on that road. I said, well, you wouldn't have bought the condo, though, would you? No. I said, well, I'll buy it back for you. I'll pay you a $10,000 profit and buy it back for you. Oh, no. He said, this is the best condominium I've ever owned. And he would tell that story to everybody that would listen, that he got taken, this top criminal attorney. And I didn't really take him. I just stroked him a little bit, for God's sake. He should have known better than that. I remember the first condo that we built, or we bought on the island. We bought a condominium in Mariner Point, 121 Mariner Point, and Alan Tenbrook was the project manager. And I had a 3-year-old boy, David, who's now 30. And one day I got a call from Alan, and he says, we have to have a meeting. So I went to this meeting, and he says, your son David threw all of the air conditioner, all of these sprinkler donuts, those concrete things they put around sprinklers, threw them in the ocean. And I'm going to have to report it to the police. I said, come on, he's 3 years old, for goodness sakes. I mean, what do they cost? And Alan, he says, that's destructiveness. I said, come on, Alan, just give me the number. And he gave me, it was $400. So I had to write a check for $400 to Mariner to avoid my 3-year-old being reported to the police. So now turn the clock to, David is about 19 when this happened. And I'm in a big battle with Mariner over, we had about 25 rental contracts in Sundial, who, if the guy owned the unit and he had guests, i.e. renters, they could go and use the resort, they could use the tennis courts, they could go to the pool. Well, Mariner was attempting to force the owners to sign their rental contract, and their method was to take away the amenities. If you didn't have a Mariner rental contract, you couldn't go to the pool, that is the community pool, the Kiki bar or Chicky bar, and so I was in a big war with Mariner over, you can't do that to these owners, and I was quoting condominium documents, and I'm writing letter to the owners, and I was winning. I was ahead. Mariner was going to back off of that. When I got a call from Alan Tenbrook, and he said, we got to have a meeting. I said, no, the issue is clear, Alan. You're going to lose this. You can't do that to those people. He said, Bob, your son's in jail. Oh, I said, which one? He said, David. And so it was like the clock turned back. I said, what did David do? Well, David and his buddy Pete Ukrainian went up and took their 4-wheel drive dump truck, or whatever the heck it had, and was pushing over signs at South Seas, and they were going to steal them, take them to their college. Not that that's good, but it was sort of inventive, I thought, But at any rate, the signs were over $500, and Tenbrook could prove it. And if it was over $500, it was a felony. And so he says, your boy's going to jail on a felony unless we could have a little talk. And so we had a little talk, and I backed off of the program. I became a very silent guy, and Mariner just did it to those people, and I just didn't say anything about it. And David stayed out of jail. And that's a good story. He does not like that story to be told too often. So I don't want anybody to think in terms that he's a bad kid. He just likes signs.
Like his father.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but those hydraulic signs, so
Right.
that would have solved the problem.
The sign ordinance. Second time I sued the city was, and I won. I lost a lot of money. I lost a project, and really I began to lose my taste for. Probably that was one of the reasons I sold executive services. I mean, other than Arlie died, I really felt that I had been, that somebody had done something to me that I didn't really like, and I thought I'd just rather go somewhere else. I had a business, executive services. It was very large, but it was in the wrong place. My office was at 455 Periwinkle, so that when you came on the island, you took a left, and you went down, had to pick up keys, and then you had to fight all the traffic going to wherever you were going. I felt then, and I felt now, that if a person could come onto the island, turn right, and pick up the keys from something on the right side of the road, which would be the north side of the road, that would be better. So I bought a piece of land, would be right at the corner of Palm Ridge and Periwinkle, not where the Palm Ridge Shopping Center is, but where the Village Shopping Center is, and hired Ray Fenton, and this was 1979, and I conceived a project that was only executive services. This was a, it was 10-acre parcel, I think it was, and it ran from Periwinkle back to what is now the road coming to City Hall. I just drove that road, and I was going to put one building on 10 acres, and it was going to be the executive services headquarters center. There were no rental units. I dedicated the back of the land to, at that time, moderate cost housing, and there was no moderate cost housing ordinance. I did that because there was no moderate cost housing, and it seemed logical. Conceived the project, went to the city, got a development permit, hired the general contractor, was into the project around $25,000 in planning and in architectural drawings. Ray Fenton was the architect. Got the permit, the development permit, not the building permit, but the development permit. And the city of Sanibel, led by my buddy Porter Goss, passed an ordinance calling for a moratorium on commercial construction on Sanibel. This was 1979, maybe 80, but I think 79. And backdated that moratorium to a week before my development permit had been issued. And I went to the council and I said, well, you know, if you want to do a moratorium, I can understand that. I don't know that I believe in it, but I understand it. But you can't backdate something. I've got a permit. It's a legit permit. And they said, basically, so sue us. And so I did, and I hired Bill Haverfield, and 3 years later, and $25,000 a year later, we won. And the city of Sanibel lost and did not appeal. No, they did appeal and lost the appeal. And there's a case, Buntrock versus City of Sanibel, and it says cities can pass moratoriums and backdate them before a permit. Well, what happened? I lost the project. I couldn't, I had it financed. I had my general contractor ready. I had $40,000 into it. And 3 years later, by that time, the interest rates had changed, the business had changed, my incentive was relatively low, and I lost it. I sold the project, and that's now the Village Shopping Center, which in my opinion creates umpty-quadrillion more cars going on to Sanibel than I would have done. But I remember Porter gave me a little plaque one day when I was complaining that they were doing it to me. He gave me a little plaque that said, and he laughed, he thought that was pretty funny. It said, sometimes you don't hear what you think you hear, but you only hear what you think you shouldn't hear, or something. I mean, it made no sense to me, but he thought that was funny. So I've got the plaque in northern Minnesota hanging on my wall. I could give you the exact language. That was one of the reasons I ran against Porter in 1980. Porter had announced that he'd been the mayor a number of times, and he had finally said, I've had it, I got to get off this council. It's time for new blood, it's time for new ideas. I've got to rest, and so therefore I am not going to run for re-election. And so that re-election was going to, well, they said I'm not going to run for re-election. And I believe somebody got elected to the council, and the council then had this new person on it. And then Zelda Butler died. And Zelda Butler was a council person. She was an owner in Loggerhead, K. I had sold her a unit. I remember she didn't like me too much because back in those days, we were can you imagine, we were rototilling the beach, because I'm from Minnesota, that's what you do in Minnesota. I didn't know about those things I was supposed to keep growing. But they all grew back and everything was cool, and Zelda almost lost it a couple of times because I'm out there with my rototiller, not a good thing. But Zelda died and her office opened up, and there was like 4 or 5 months left in her term, and under the rules, there had to be an election. Yeah, you couldn't just appoint. There had to be an election for the unexpired term. And so I remember there were a group of us, John Cantinas and me and Don Bissell, a fellow that used to own Steve Price, his name, big guy, Price. It was a restaurant. Sam Price.
Sam Price.
Fred Walton, a whole bunch of us sitting around trying to figure out who we ought to get to run from the business community, because we knew that there would be an environmentalist candidate and there'd be some candidate. Since it's only a 5-month deal, we ought to be able to convince some business person to run, not thinking that we'd ever win, but at least to get the business viewpoint in front of the voters. And while we're sitting dreaming up this who's going to run, Porter announced that he was going to run for Zelda's unexpired term. Well, I remember talking to Porter and saying, Porter, you were in the paper, you said it's time for new blood, it's time for this, it's time for that. How come you're running? Well, his theory was what the council needs is a transition person with knowledge, a person that knows the inner workings of city government. And so therefore I'm going to run to be a caretaker for 5 months. Well, I said, that's baloney. You said you weren't and you shouldn't. So I stayed on this committee to talk to people about who are we going to get to run against Porter. Well, nobody wanted. Running against Porter would be like running against Jesus. You know. But who are we going to get? And nobody would do it, nobody would do it, nobody would do it. And I think I needed 10 signatures. About 2 hours before the deadline, I went out and got 10 signatures, and I said, well, I'll do it. So I ran against Porter Goss. That was the funniest thing I ever did. Bill Fry and Don Bissell were my campaign managers. I debated Porter a couple of times, and I got some good. A couple of times he says, you know, you really did your homework. I didn't expect that. So. And then I remember there was something like 93% of the voters turned out. They were walking them in wheelchairs and supporting them, and there was no way I was going to win, but they were going to do me a number. Miami Herald came over and did a big story on a developer daring to run against the entrenched conservation environmentalist group. And I got beat. As most people have done, about 1/3 to 2/3. Maybe it's getting better now, I don't know. But it was fun, and it gave me a chance to go back and read the plan, which was then now 5 years old. The city came in, what, 74, 75, and the original city either charter or plan said that, I think the original land plan that was passed right after the city said that every 5 years it would be updated. So they were in the midst of the update. And I had a chance, I had to debate Porter, so I took the plan and read it. And there were things in there, for example, that I pointed out during the debates. For example, the first plan said clearly that it was a goal of the original city to take Periwinkle, well, to come on the island and turn about where the Chamber of Commerce is and go one way, skirting Gumbo Limbo, skirting the dunes, didn't have anything in it at that time, going through the dunes, skirting Gumbo Limbo, going through all the vacant land, coming out about Palm Ridge, probably going right over the land where the city hall is, and there would be a one-way road going to Captiva, and then coming back from Captiva, it would be two-way to about where the library, no, about where the post office is, and Periwinkle would be one-way coming back, and there would be a turnaround, almost like the European turnabouts where you came in and swung out, and that was all in that original plan, and that would have solved this mess that we've got now. Absolutely would have solved it. But it never passed, well, it never was implemented, and I truly believe it wasn't implemented because in the viewpoint of the people in control, that would have spawned more development. If you solve the transportation problem, then more people would come, more developers would come. I think they've proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that that was wrong thinking. Just sit on Periwinkle for 2.5 hours in the middle of March. That was one thing. There was another thing that in that original plan that I thought was so inconsistent that I can't remember what it is. But the trend, in the original plan, it was mandated that there would be a community-wide sewer system as soon as possible. And within a year or two, like '76, there was a city vote, I remember, on a sewer system. And as I remember it lost like 900 to, I think there were maybe 10 of us that voted for it. Under the theory, again, that if there was a citywide sewer system, that it would spawn development, because it would be easier to get permits, etc. And now, in the last 10 years, I've been off of Sanibel for 10 years, but in the last 10 years, isn't there now a citywide sewer system, and wasn't the cost relatively?
It's working.
It's being implemented.
Oh, okay. Well, those were the two biggest inconsistencies, and then there was another one. In the original plan, there was a provision that you could have a horse farm on Sanibel. And I pointed that out. I said, well, to Porter in this debate, I said, well, where's the horse farm? Here you got yourself this thing. And he laughed. He said, well, we didn't get to everything, you know. I think the new plan's got the horse farm out of there, I think. But it was fun. I remember at Loggerhead, when we were building Loggerhead, the #2 building, construction stopped for about a week because Velna Ridge had a pet black snake. It was about 12 or 14 foot long, and it had to be as big as, this, and it looked ferocious, but as I understand it, they're docile. Well, this black snake, #2 building is where her home was, a little over to the right. In fact, her home sat there for years after we completed Loggerhead, and then they finally, I guess, tore it down. But the snake was evidently living in or near her home, and then would crawl up on the walkway of Loggerhead. And
I want to get this. Good.
The snake would come out of Velna's, it was living probably under Velna's home, which was a white stucco, maybe concrete block home, and it was all run down. Well, this snake would crawl up on the first level of Loggerhead's back porch and lay there 12 foot long, and the workmen wouldn't work. And we called there wasn't Crow or anything like that. We called into Lee County, as I remember. This was 72 or 3 or 4, and they came out. It was before the city. They came out and got the snake. I don't know what they did with the snake, but that was a big deal. When we were building Loggerhead, there were 2 methods of building. One was pilings, and the other one was what they called a floating foundation. And I didn't know, I'm not an engineer, I had no idea. All I know is that I'm from Minnesota, and when you build, you go to bedrock. You go to rock, and then you put whatever you're going to put, you put on the rock, and the rock never moves, so you're on what we then call bedrock or solid rock. Well, there's no such thing here. Pilings are something you drive into the ground. It's engineered, the length is engineered, so the compaction of that piling driven into the sand will give you this foundation. The other system was digging, say, 8 foot into the ground and making a 4 or 8 by 8 square, and then pouring a lot of concrete. And basically you had a pad sitting on sand, and then you usually built a wall out and connected the top, so if it ever eroded, the water wouldn't erode the sand under the piling or under the pad until you really got a bad storm. So I know, for example, King's Crown is built on pilings, Loggerhead K is built on pads. And I used to sell against Marty Holtz. Marty Holtz and down Bissell. Bissell and Holtz was a real estate company. And Marty had the exclusive of King's Crown. And he'd always say about Loggerhead, it's not built on pilings. If you buy there, you may not be with us long. And then I would say, I'm over at Loggerhead, and I'd say, well, it's built on pilings, but pilings are just toothpicks driven into the ground. And ours has at least got some heft to it. Well, that wasn't working. He was beating me, because he claimed his pilings went to bedrock. Well, there's no such thing. So one day I decided that I would take care of my friend, Mr. Holtz. And I said, okay, here, this is non-engineer Buntrock. I said, here's the piling, and here's the pad. And the pad's got a protective bridge around it. Now, in comes this huge wave, and it hits this, and this pad sinks 4 feet maybe 8 feet, this pad will, because the sand won't be here, the pad's going to go down. But this same wave hits these pilings, and there's going to be no sand here. This building going to fall over. This building is going to just sink. So if you want to have a first floor unit, you buy a second floor unit, because it'll be the first floor unit. The other building not going to be there, and I just knocked his socks off. We sold Loggerhead. Don't know what the engineering validity to that was, but sold a lot of units, by God. I had a fire one time at Loggerhead. We were building our third, fourth, and fifth building, and we knocked down then you didn't have any vegetation committee. I mean, you could actually cut a tree down, and if a building was going to go, they didn't have to call anybody, you could take it down. You used your judgment as to what trees were going to be kept, because obviously you cut one down and you had to buy one, that was more money, so we kept a lot of trees. But we took the trees down where the trees needed to be down, and there was no law against burning at that point, except you needed a permit. And you had to, I remember I had to go off island to get the permit. But at any rate, I cut the trees down, got the permit, lit the fire, and I had more Shell Harbor people at my place. And I must have sold 3 or 4 condos, because they'd never been to Loggerhead before. I mean, you know, all I do is light a fire. And it was led by Whitehead, the editor of Don Whitehead. Oh, he said, there's ashes coming on my screen, on my pool screen. I said, whoa, that is bad. Can you imagine ashes coming on a pool screen? Don, that's terrible. Is it burning your pool screen? No. Well, it'd probably blow off of there. I'm reporting you, you don't have a permit. Well, I did have a permit, and I was visited by every fire marshal within 200 miles, I swear. But all they did was delay me. They made me stop. And there used to be a group of us that had coffee at what was then the Lighthouse Restaurant. And Fred Bolton was one. Isabel was another. Isabel Kirkpatrick, who was one of the original owners of Scotty's, only before Scotty, wasn't it? Isabel's? Okay, well, Isabel was maybe 80, 85 at that time, and Bolton and I and I don't know, a bunch of the Mariner guys, well, it had to be 9 guys, plus Isabel, and we would all meet for coffee. And I remember when Fred Walton walked in and he laid down the first, no, not the first issue, the prototype issue of the Island Reporter, and he said, "This is it, gentlemen. That's the new paper on Sanibel Island." And it was on glossy stock, high gloss stock. And I have a journalism degree, and I was in the newspaper business before I got into this business of development and stuff. And I looked at it, and I didn't say it to him, but I thought to myself, who's gonna buy a thing on glossy stock? There's nothing on glossy stock. So this is the paper. I said, is that exactly what it's gonna, that's exactly what it's gonna be like. And they had an ad schedule, and you could buy ads and everything. And then about 3 months later, out came the first issue, and it was on newsprint, like any other newspaper. And I remember going into Fred and I'm saying, "Fred, you said this one was exactly like the first issue. Now, this is high gloss, this is newsprint." "Well," he said, "I didn't mean exactly." I said, "Well, how many of the stories are not exactly what you're writing?" He said, "You know, Buntrock, you're a troublemaker." And then last time I saw Fred, and I think Fred's dead now. Last time I saw Fred, when my wife had cancer, my son had cancer, and Fred was in the hospital. It must have been just before he died. And I would go visit Arlie, Hippie, and Fred. And we would chuckle about what I said was subterfuge in the selling of the ads. Gordon Tracy, Belna Ridge's boy Gordon, who now has a marina repair shop in, he has a repair shop at Grand Island Center, and that was one of the shopping centers that Bert Jenks, Joan Good, I, and Banks Pravat owned. And then we ultimately sold it to Bert and Joni, and I think they still own it. But Gordon was Velma's boy, and we bought the Ridge trailer park. It was the second trailer park. And Gordon was just a 16, 17-year-old renegade at that stage of the game. And I remember after Belna moved back to her home, which we used to call the cat house, not because of that, but because she had a lot of cats. You understand that? Okay. But it was Sanibel's, probably not the first cat house, but she must have had 150 cats, at least.
She had 19.
And that house now Joan Good owns and remodeled. That was Belma's house. But I remember Gordon moved out, and I went to visit Belna one day, and because we used to make our payments to Belna, that's who we bought the land from, and I went to make the payment to Belna, and I asked where Gordon was, and she said, "Well, he's living on our land that we're going to build another trailer park." I said, "Where is he?" "Well, he's up there." So I got in I had a 66 square black Volkswagen, which was my Highland car, and it went anywhere. And I drove up to where now is the road to City Hall, and it was a dirt road, and it meandered, and I'll bet you he was living in a tent, and I'll bet you his tent it was on the left side of the road, but I'll bet you it's about where I am, about where the library was, but on the other side. Gordon had a tent, and I remember he had a line, he had his underwear on the line, and he was pitching out on this piece of land that they owned, and were attempting to get approval of a trailer park. And you would think that if a family had owned the first trailer park, and it was on the beach, and that they sold it, and they had acquired land and wanted to build another trailer park, you would think that would be logical, that would happen. But it didn't. He got whipped, and I don't know the whole story, but I know that Gordon was camping out on his trailer park land.
Which is now this whole strip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Eileen Lotz, the mother of Sanibel. Eileen was a young lady from Dade County, as I remember. She came over to be the executive director of the executive coordinator of the incorporation group, and ultimately got the moniker the mother of Sanibel. She was at the right place at the right time. But I sold a condo to Eileen later, and I found her to be semi-human. In fact, we used to laugh about that a lot. she had a painting in her living room, I remember, and I said it looked like something, and she said it didn't, and I can't tell you what I said it looked like, but she always said that I had a distorted viewpoint, because I could see something in this painting that nobody else could see. But Eileen went on to become I met Eileen 10 years ago, and she's now a bird, she writes bird books. And I've got all of her books because I get a lot of bird watchers at my resort up in Minnesota. But you know, it's funny to think back of all of us being here at 40 years old, and I was probably pretty old. Most of the Mariner group was mostly 30, 32, 33, 34 years old. Bob Taylor is maybe 10 years old, younger than I am now. But there was that group of people that hit here to work, and we were all trying to create something. We were in the midst of change. Looking back, the biggest thing that I'm still amazed at is that as sharp as these people were, the people that were working and building, they never figured out that unless they tussled, when the opportunity to tussle was presented, you had to tussle and fight a battle. They kept giving up, giving up, giving up, and that's why prices are where they are, and that's why. And maybe it turned out good. Maybe it's wonderful that condos are 500,000 and 600,000 and $1 million and $1.5 million. But maybe it's not so wonderful that lots of people can't live here that would like to live here. My son, 41 years old, still doesn't own a home. Wants to live on Sanibel. Probably could have, but has always rented with 2 or 3 roommates illegally. You know, there's an ordinance that says you can't do that. I can't understand why the city hasn't figured that out yet. But that's not one family. Richard Butler, no. Baker, Richard Baker, Dick Baker. Dick Baker was the sign ordinance guy, and he was the man for the
Code enforcement?
code enforcement. Dick,
That-
I swear he spent every other day with me. He looked at every sign I put up 12 times. I got more red tags from Dick than you can imagine, but we remained buddies, and I'd always laugh when he'd come down, because I'd always put too many items of information on my sign, or it was always an inch too big, and I didn't mean it to be. It just seemed like that's the way it turned out. But Dick was a neat guy and a lot of fun. And Chief Butler was another neat guy. I read his book, and I can imagine the agony he went through to write that. I would guess that's about as much as I can rattle off, unless you ask me some questions and I remind myself of a few.
Well, one of the things is Pirate Playhouse.
Oh,
That was.
Pirate Playhouse. Ruth and Philip Hunter were on the island, and they would put on plays utilizing island people. And I was working in my model one day, and I had never met Ruth. She came knocking on the door, and she said, "I understand that you would be willing to act in a play." And I said, "Who told you that?" "Well, nobody told me that. I just think that I've heard enough about you that we'd like to have you come and read." So I said, "Well, fine, I'll do that." So I went over, The Girls in 509. That was the name of it. The Girls in 509. And I went over and I read for the role of a politician. And I was both a Democrat and a Republican, and it depended upon what act I was in, whether I was a Democrat or Republican.
That sounds about right.
And Pat Slater had the other lead, and we rehearsed and just had a ball. And I really feel badly that didn't continue. And it seems to me it did for 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
And then it started to get into the pros. Because she would just go to anyone that lived on the island, build her company, and of course everybody's been in or most people have been in a school play, but it was more fun But I only did one, because it was also a lot of time, plus I didn't want to learn the lines. I felt that that's an intrusion into my personal life, is that somebody's gonna force me
You
to learn a
want to
line.
do your own line.
Yeah, that's what I was
So-
gonna say, ad-lib the entire
Oh,
part.
well, and I would
You
ad
could've
lib
done that.
during the practice, and she kept saying, "You've got to learn the lines." Well, finally, and maybe that's where Elaine Burke and I, finally the night before the play, I decided I better learn some of those lines. And I remember going around Loggerhead and getting everybody, and I was reading these lines, and I guess I came out okay. I got messed up a little bit, but that was a fun time. There were other things like that, but I can't remember what we did. We had a lot of bonfires on the beach, but I guess you can't do that anymore.
Can't do that anymore.
You know, or with a permit, I suppose you could.
I don't think you can even with a permit.
I remember when we had, Bert Jenks sold us our condo. So I
Mhm.
recall some of these names, but, at that time, well, you could have a fire on the beach if it was in a container.
Oh, yeah.
And we had, charcoal grill about this big and fire about this big.
Back when Sanibel Realty began, and Bert Jenks was our manager, I remember making a presentation to John Continus and Bill Frizzell. Bill's now dead, and is John living?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I remember going up to what is now Tarwinkle's, but it was like the Coconut
Coconut Grove.
Okay, Coconut Grove. Meeting with John to make a presentation to be the exclusive sales agent of the dunes. He and Bill had done the dunes, and it had gotten into trouble. And they stopped sales because they had not filed some paper with some federal land sales board, that because they had X number of units or X number of lots. At any rate, they put a stop order on it and sort of destroyed the sales of the dunes. And it was going to crank back up again, and a lot of us were called in to make a presentation as to who they were going to select to be the sales agent. And I was called in because Executive Services at that time was supposedly a top project sales company. We sold out King's Crown, Sandalfoot, Nutmeg Village, Loggerhead Cay, Coquina Beach. We probably had 35 condos that we were the exclusive sales agent of and sold over the years until they were gone. So I brought a pretty good track record to the table. And I wanted, as I remember, 10% if I sold them. And I was going to pass 5% through to another real estate broker. And I was going to pass 8% through to another real estate broker. And I was going to work on 2%. And I said, or I wanted 12%, and I would work on 2%, and I'd pass 10% through to another real estate broker, because most real estate brokers get 10% on all land. So my theory was, if a real estate broker got 10%, and I was the exclusive agent, and he still got 10%, wow, would he sell dunes lots? But in order to make that work, I didn't want to work for nothing. In order to make that work, I had to get 12, so I was working on 2. And he would only pay 10, so I could only pass 8% to the real estate broker, and my contention was that it wouldn't sell well. So we were at this impasse. I wanted 12, John wanted to pay 10. So, and I had heard John was sort of a gambler. He was a risk taker. So I said, tell you what, John, why don't we do this? How many units do you need sold in the next 30 days? He said, 50. I said, okay. I said, if I bring you 50 contracts in the next 30 days, you pay me 12%? Done. 12%, you got it. And if I don't, you only pay me 10%. He says, you're likely not even to be here at the end of 30 days if you don't. I said, okay. He said, how many lots have you sold in the last 3 years? He said, 6. I said, so 50 is a pretty big number. He said, you better believe it. He said, you got no chance. Okay. So I walked out with the deal. Was nothing in writing. It was 10 or 12. And I had a guy by the name of Bob Flaherty. Remember Bob?
That name is familiar.
Bob Flaherty was a salesman from East Coast. Bob was older than me, so he's probably 75 now. But Bob had been on the East Coast in Lauderdale, in that area, when property values went like property values did here. You know, when it went from here to there. And Bob would get his map of Florida out and he'd draw circles and he'd say, this is what happened there. This is more attractive than that. This will happen here faster. And if you're not in on the ground floor, there's something wrong with you. And people would say, you were there? Yeah. You saw it? Yeah. You believe it? Yeah. And they'd sign. Well, I called Bob Flaherty and I said, here's the deal. You got to sell me 50 lots in 30 days. He said, that's not a problem. I said, well, good. I said, you do that and I'll give you an extra point on the sales. If we're going to get 12, I'll give you an extra point. Bob got on the phone and we sold 50 lots in like 26 days, sold and closed 50 lots. And then Continas didn't want to pay. And I said, John, here's what I know about you. You're honest, you never renege on a deal, and that was the deal, and you know it, so I know the check's going to come through at 12%. And I left, and the check came through at 12%, and it was just wonderful. But he groaned about that for just years. He thought I had, he thought I had 50 lots in my back pocket, and all I had was Flaherty, and Flaherty was awesome. He could sell anything to anybody. But, at Loggerhead, what sold Loggerhead and what sold all the condos in the early stages was the belief that it was going to happen, because there was no rental programs. There was, all you could do was to say, if you buy this, this is what we're going to try to do, and everybody was a pioneer. And as I look back now, it's really amazing to me that it all happened. And values have just gone bananas, and people that thought they were going to make 20,000 made 150,000. A lot of the homeowners on San V were those original condo owners. It was fun. Well, I don't know any more history. Maybe I do, I just can't remember any more history.
You're going to be back here December 10th, 11th, and 12th? That's when we're celebrating the city's 25th anniversary.
Oh, absolutely.
And it would be good to have you here, and one of the first things we're going to do is have a reenactment of an early council meeting.
Oh, yeah?
And so, those of you
The
who were
loyal
around,
opposition.
I'm just thinking what fun it would be to bring up something like the sewer system, the traffic plan, or the horse farm.
If I can be out in the audience, just ask a
That's-
question or two from
That's
time to time.
exactly
I'd love
how
to
we
do
have it
that.
planned. It's all,
Sign ordinance and
Yep.
backdating of moratoriums would be
Yep,
my
okay.
strong suit.
okay, you got it.
Those nice guys. Well, listen, I thank
Porter
you.
Goss has promised to be here.
Oh, I
So,
love
you can address him directly.
I'm just more than happy to address it. I'll bring the plaque down.
All right,
I
yes.
didn't hear what I thought I'd hear.
Yeah,
I appreciate the opportunity, and
you did a great job.
Oh,
I
thank
have
you.
a lot of historical stuff that I said I would find, I just didn't look for it. But I brought all the stuff that I had, I brought up there. I have all the banners, like when I ran against Porter, my campaign slogan was, the land plan was known as the club, is it still?
Yeah.
No, it's been
Club
changed to
is-
the Sanibel plan now it's
Okay,
called.
well, it was the
was
club.
And it was
It was a
comprehensive.
comprehensive
plan.
land use
Yeah, they
plan, it was
changed
called the club.
wording.
And my campaign slogan was, our club runneth us over. Not a good thing. People called it sacrilegious, and I said, well, it's doing it to us, for goodness sake, you can't do anything. That was not a good thing. Yeah,
That would be
was fun.
wonderful to see some of those things.
I've got them
Those
all.
banners, that would be.
Got 'em all. And I had after I got beat, I had a cocktail party. A defeat party, we called it a defeat party. It wasn't a victory party. And I remember Valton came. He was the only, we invited the council, and we invited Porter, and we invited him. Nobody came except Fred. And I had created a bunch of signs, and I only have one left, and they were all, 6 inch by 18 inches.
Oh,
And,
within the legal limit,
Huh?
well within.
Oh, yeah.
The legal limit.
Well, I created these signs, and I had them all over the yard and all over the walk as you came up, and each one of them was a takeoff on what I perceived to be a stupid ordinance. And the only one I got left was drink limit. 180 drinks was the drink limit, because there was 180 permits per year, but that's all that could be issued. And we kept saying, who says 180? Why 180? What's it tied to? Where did you get 180?
That was
But-
the rate of growth.
Well, the rate of growth ordinance, yeah.
Remember?
But where, I mean, what's wrong with 150 or 182? Where
Yeah.
at least you'd have some scientific basis for it. But that's the only sign out of all the signs that I made up, and I probably have got the copy that I had. But I've got that sign, and it was drink limit 180 per person. That's what it was. And then I was at a carnival one time, and they had these signs that this, no parking signs, and it was designed like a no parking sign, but it said speed limit 180 miles per hour. I immediately bought that. I have that in my office now because it has 180 in it. So those were the fun things. All my kids stayed. Kippy has never moved. My son Keith has never moved off the island, and my Kippy or David and Robin are both in Cape Coral now. They've all come back. They consider themselves island kids. Maybe they're a little nicer than the first island kids. Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and I will be here the 10th, 11th, and 12th.
All right.
So that'll be fun.
Yeah. Relationship with county government. There will be a high-rise bridge.
Think so? That's your prediction?
I'm afraid you're right. I think that the county wants, or
And it
Fort
will
Myers
come- it
wants
will come
too
to
much
the
to have a
island
deep water
closest to
port.
us. Oh, yeah.
They want those tour boats.
Well, to me, it's the same as if you go all the way back to Fort Myers when there was no bridge. And you had to drive to Alva, back when Thomas Edison was here. I mean, it's all part of the community. And even though some Sanibelites don't think this, we are still part of a community that includes Cape Coral and Pine Island and Fort
They
Myers.
should have built the second bridge a long time
Long
ago
time,
when
yeah.
we were talking about it.
And then the second bridge would go to Pine Island?
Uh-huh.
That could very well be. That'd be neat.
It would never happen now, but they should have done that back from Captiva over. We
South
would have had the
Seas,
great
right?
circle
Yeah,
tour
that'd
that
be
they
better.
were.
Yep.
Yeah.
No.
Mhm.
You don't think that would happen now?
I doubt it, seriously.
They say that Pine Island Sound is protected water,
Well,
federally.
so is this supposedly.
Yeah, but there's,
Yeah, but you
but
could go
that
at,
was the reason why, anyway.
you
when-
could go at that from the safety issue though, I would think. Just the evacuation issue that as Sanibel and Captiva continue to grow and get people out.
Yeah.
And then the clout would be up there too,
Well, the same thing in terms of Fort Myers Beach. At one point, they were talking about a bridge over to that Coconut Road near Benita,
mhm.
Yeah.
at the south end of Fort Myers Beach. Logically, it makes sense.
Well, thank you, ladies. It's fun to be back. I didn't think I'd ever come back. It really took Joan and Bert to call me, and I didn't go off with a lot of animosities, but there was no reason to get, once Harley died, what was my purpose to come back? But now that I've come back and spent the year, it's been fun, and you've been a great help, you know. It's been fun to think about the crazy times. And that computer, they got me learning that computer. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life.
He's not computer friendly.
I can book things twice as fast manually than they can on the computer.
Yeah.
There was somebody today that was talking about Windows for Dummies, and he said he needed a book that was for dummies, Windows for Dummies.
Yeah.
Well, I can see a lot of advantages, but now that I've learned to not be so intimidated about not doing it the way you guys do it, I mean, if I can't mechanically make that thing work as fast as I can do it manually, why not just use it as a typewriter? I mean, there's days that I can book 6 things manually that I never would have booked one thing.
And with much better interaction than worrying about how to
Yeah.
out of the
Yeah.
program to get to something else.
Oh, I tell you, that's fun. I bought a computer 5 years ago, and I turned it on, and I made a few errors. They said it was user-friendly. It was a Mac. It was user-friendly. Well, I didn't ever ask anybody what that meant. But it seemed to me that what it meant is that it was easy. Yeah.
That's how I did.
Well, I didn't realize easy means easier, not easy, because you're still, as I think about it now, look at, I took typing for a year before I knew how to type. What made me think I could sit at a computer for 10 minutes and run a computer? I don't have any idea why I thought that, but I did. 10 minutes later, I got so frustrated, I just turned it off, never turned it back on again.
You know, if you've got your kids handy, it works for me. I just call them up and say, what do I do now?
Well, I did that with Cameron, and he's at the point where he says
He
he will
won't take your
never
phone
touch
calls,
my, my computer again, because he killed it trying to fix it.
Oh, yeah.
I was without it for months and months.
Well, I brought mine down, thinking I would plug it in, and if I learned anything on this one, and I think I could probably at least turn it on
But
now.
a Mac and this are very different, too.
Yeah, but it's still got buttons, and I assume it's got a picture up there that you point
You
at.
have the confidence now.
I've always lacked confidence.
Oh, yes, right, I'm sure of
See you
that.
So
ladies.
nice to meet you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.